Welcome to the New People, New Ways podcast, brought to you by Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist, where we explore new ways of being church through the stories and insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Isaiah Park. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your co host, Director of Church Planting, Innovation, and Diversity at Path One, New Church Starts at Discipleship Ministries, and a cultivator of Fresh Expressions in Reston, Virginia.
And I'm Michael Adam Beck. I'm the Director of Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions UM. And today we are honored to welcome the one and only Bishop David Wilson. Reverend Dr. Wilson has served as resident bishop of the Great Plains Conference of the United Methodist Church since January 1st, 2023. Lots of awesome stuff going on in this conference. Mm-hmm. He was elected to the episcopacy on November 2nd, 2022, in a historic moment for our denomination, becoming the first Native American elected as bishop in the history of the United Methodist Church. So he's a proud member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and Bishop Wilson previously served as assistant to the bishop of the Oklahoma-Indiana Indian Missionary Conference, which includes 81 Native American churches across Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. And before that, he was the conference superintendent for 18 years, while also pastoring Norman First American UMC, a congregation that experienced significant growth and completed a new building during his tenure there. Bishop Wilson's ministry has been rich and varied. He served as a campus minister, youth director, adjunct professor, and leader of numerous denominational boards, including the General Board of Global Ministries and the Connectional Table. His academic journey includes degrees from Eastern Oklahoma State College, Oklahoma City University, and Phillips Theological Seminary, where he became the first OIMC clergy graduate and was later honored as distinguished alumni. He also holds an honorary doctorate from Bacon College. And beyond his church leadership, Bishop Wilson is known for his commitment to civic engagement, directing initiatives like Rock the Native Vote to empower Native American voters. And he frequently lectures on Native American spirituality and has received numerous awards for his teaching, his leadership, community service. In his free time, he enjoys running and studying history, especially the rich history of Native peoples. And he's been teaching all week at the Lakeside Chautauqua, and still made time for us today. So thank you so much, Bishop. We're grateful for your ministry, your witness, and your presence with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Bishop, thank you again. We're so excited to be on the podcast with you. So Bishop, we want to ask you a couple of questions. The first question is, who is David Wilson?
Yeah. Thank you. And again, Isaiah and Michael, it's good to be with you this morning. And as you mentioned, been at Chautauqua all week, having a great experience. On occasion, I get to do lectures, not too often, so I enjoyed doing that. I would say, first of all, David Wilson's a child of God. This week at Chautauqua, my theme was about understanding God's diversity and all the people around the world who are beloved children of God, which is a lesson I continue to teach because there's been times in our history when my own people, indigenous people, have not been considered beloved children of God, even by the church. And so I always start with that. Introduced me already as a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation, also Cherokee on my mother's side, and for myself, a person who is thankful to be used in the ways that God calls me to be in ministry right now as the bishop of the Great Plains, all of Kansas and Nebraska, which I'm enjoying so very, very much there. And a person, David Wilson, a person who's big about social justice, and really a lot of it is just around sharing ways that indigenous people, all peoples, have been about this business of serving the world through our lives. And so thank you for that good question.
Thank you, Bishop Wilson. So as the first Native American bishop in the history of the United Methodist Church, you bring a unique perspective to ministry. So how has your cultural heritage shaped the way you understand and practice mission in ways that might resonate with Fresh Expressions, which is a lot of what our listeners are thinking about and trying to do?
Yeah, sure. You know, I know one of the facets of Fresh Expressions is talking about inclusivity, and that's been a big piece. I share this story often. My friend Laurie Young, who's a clergy member here in the Great Plains, whenever I was at the 2024 General Conference, I was asked to preach. And so, of course, it's an anxious time, and I really didn't want to, but my friend said, you know, you're the first Indigenous bishop, you know, they're going to ask you. And sure enough, they did, and had to preside as well, which turned out to be a great experience. So that morning, I called folks together to say, hey, I'm preaching. Can you meet me early and pray with me? And so many of my Great Plains clergy and lay people came and did that. Laura led the prayer, and she, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, we're thankful for Bishop Wilson and for all the people, Indigenous people he represents around the world. And so when I got done, I told her, I said, that was a daunting piece of that prayer, to be reminded that that's myself being the only Indigenous person, and the weight that carries people at home, elders and others who expect me to represent our people and to do it well. And so that's a lot to deal with. So that prayer was kind of a difficult prayer. I said, that's not the prayer I wanted, but I ran with it and was able to do that. So being first has so many connotations, and especially being the only Indigenous person on the Council of Bishops. And I find myself often having to educate folk about what we do and do not do, and especially around inclusion. And that's become a difficult place. It's everywhere, but even on that level as well. For that, when I think about what that means for that. But that's probably the biggest piece is thinking about how we include Indigenous peoples in all facets of the United Methodist Church and what we get to do. And later I'll talk about some of the other pieces around that. And Fresh Expressions, I believe, that looks for innovative ways for us to be connected, to be involved in the life of the church and denomination. And that's a big piece. What I'm always thinking about, whether it's in the Great Plains Conference or in other places as well.
Thank you for that. I was doing some research on a book on Fresh Expressions and kind of early Methodism in the United States, and there was the first Indigenous leader that I could find was a named Turtle Fields, and I'm just the fact that it took us 300 years to have our first native. I mean, it's just kind of sad, really, part of our history that, you know, we do have some racism and this kind of exclusivist impulse baked into the denomination. So it gives me great hope, and I can't imagine the mantle that you have to carry, the weight of that. So, but you do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have the Oklahoma Conference Foundation years ago would put covers on their programs. And this shows how long I've been around, since the programs that they would have year-end reports. And one of those was a beautiful picture of Turtle Fields, who I think was the first native convert Cherokee. So I have a beautiful print in my office at the house there that depicts him. And you're right about that, Michael. I think about my ancestors who became Christians over 180 years ago, and found, people ask often, why would, and people ask that question this week, given all that the church has done to your people, why would you want to be a Christian? And had an elder years ago who said, when the missionaries came among our people, we asked them, what is it about this Christianity? And he said, do you take care of your people and you love one another? And he said, we already do that. And so that made it, that just that connection and similarity between what we've known as tribal religions and Christianity, that made it easy. Now the challenge was how it was lived out there across the church, and that's been a big piece. So I think about that often there, and also mindful. While I get to do this teaching about Native American history and culture and the rest, I also get to run this annual conference, which I have learned over the years and watched and observed, serving under many bishops, and feel, I'm able to do both well, and I sure work on that throughout my ministry.
Thank you so much, Bishop. Another question for you. Fresh expressions, they often begin in community spaces that are far from the traditional church buildings. How have you seen ministry flourish and do well in non-traditional settings among Native American congregations? And what might the wider church learn from those experiences?
Sure. One of the things I think about when I had finished serving at Norman First American, was still there in Oklahoma City, working with, I think, a superintendent at the time. And I found there was a large group of folk who just did not, Native folk who did not attend any churches. Most were connected somehow through Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, but they just weren't going anywhere. So we began meeting once a month at my house. A couple others said, hey, what do you think about this idea of getting together? So every third Wednesday we'd meet, we'd have a meal, which is important for us. And then we'd have tribal hymns and just a time for sharing, just really time to get together. And that was really important, especially in the urban context when you're so spread out. So we soon outgrew my home. And then we found a church in Oklahoma City, United Methodist Church, who let us use the facility. And the neat part about this church, Isaiah, was that there's many places we've used, and they watch every step. This church, they gave you the key. Gave you a key and said, anything here is yours. And we were in relationship probably 15 years. And so that grew. And one of the neatest pieces of that is there was a home for children, foster children who were waiting to be adopted, junior high through high school. And one of our members did yoga for them. She said, hey, there's some Native American people, young folk there. Can we invite them? I said, sure, invite everybody. So they began to come. And that was the highlight for that gathering. Most of our people who came really just to see those girls who the director said, these girls have done nothing wrong. Their parents just can't be parents right now. And so our folks fell in love with them and did everything for them. And they became surrogate grandmothers and mothers and fathers and grandmothers. And it was that connection of, again, another group of folk who are on the edge of what people believe, the edge of what it means to be, quote unquote, in other settings, I guess I'm thinking about. But I just think about how we reached out. Now that soon after that, the state closed the home down, we lost contact with most of the girls. And I occasionally, I'm in that part of Oklahoma City, and I'll drive by, the church is gone. And I'm thinking, I wonder if any of these girls ever drive by, and thinking, where are they at? But that's a great example of this, what it means for us to have this fresh expression there where folks gather just to come to worship and to be in community and to just embrace all people that come away.
Amen. I often find when we kind of like find where the heartbeat of the pain is in a community, and we lead with inclusivity as our value, the Holy Spirit just reads on that, and all kind of things come out of it. I know indigenous traditions place deep value on storytelling, and in Fresh Expression, I've been trying to take some of that indigenous wisdom and kind of weave it into how we go about doing this sermonic conversations, dialogical preaching, Jesus stories, which really traces back to the early practice of the church, to the kerygma and that treasure of Jesus stories. But how might the church reclaim storytelling, not just the cultural practice, but like a missional method for communicating Jesus and creating community with people? And what can the wider church or the institutional church kind of learn from that, do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I think for myself, in my preaching, I do more storytelling than anything. Years ago, a friend of mine, Ray Buckley, wrote a resource for lay speaking ministry. I think it's called Dancing with Words. And Ray talks about the impact of storytelling and what people retain and remember. And he talks about, as some studies they did or with folk, and about preaching and storytelling, and how most people retain the storytelling more than the preaching for that. So that becomes important to me, to use stories to illustrate some of what we've talked about today, inclusion, stories that bring the examples of how we are to be in community with each other. And often these stories resonate so much with the scriptures, and people are surprised at that. And even going back to quotes and stories I find from tribal traditions, they resonate. I mean, you can run parallel with stories we can find in the Bible there, and so those become important to me also because it tells you a bit about who we are and about the impact of the stories, the examples, and the lessons that come from that. I used many last week, and when I begin, as both of you know, when you're teaching and you're on a track and you think about this story and that story, and I think the stories are the ones that have the most impact. Later we'll talk about 7 generations. When I finished at Chautauqua, I was going to the bookstore, which I hadn't been to all week, which was a good thing, and I met people who came to my lecture, and they said, "Thank you so much for that today." He said, "I think about the stories you told and the tidbits that I can take from that to use for my own life." And he began to share his story with me of losing his son and his mother's impact upon his life as a Christian educator, and how that story has helped him to think about what else can I do. And so that's the impact of stories, I think, that the church needs to regain and to use for our ministries.
Mm. I remember someone once said, "What if everything that we said had to be framed within a story? Like
Oh
everything
yeah,
that we
yeah,
shared, right?
yeah, yeah.
That would be such a powerful way of describing life and things and who we are. So I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and I often
Um,
think I say when I preach, sometimes I'm thinking, I use so many stories. I'm thinking, I always think about the value of those, but also thinking about what else we add to those. But those stories become the premier piece. And when we begin writing a sermon, always begins with scripture. But sometimes I'll find a story, and I know what scripture is going to go with that, and so that's what I do. I run with it. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So here's another question. So Fresh Expressions depends heavily on empowering lay leaders, laity, who are the heartbeat of the church.
Yeah.
And in your years with the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, how have you equipped everyday disciples to lead ministries in their context, in their communities? And what advice would you give others seeking to do the same thing?
Yeah, where I come out of, the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, lay people, and in the Great Plains as well, are so important and so valuable. Now, the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference goes back to the heydays of circuit riders, and so it may be a month before the pastor circuit rider got to your church, and so in the meantime, the lay people run the show. I mean, they preach, they teach, they lead the music, take care of the buildings, they do everything, and they still do today. I think in the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, they probably have more lay missioners now than they do local pastors and elders. And some of those churches would not be around had it not been for the commitment of these lay people who serve the church. And so it's been a necessity for me for lay people. I remember growing up as a young child. There's 7 of us, and I was the main one, so that was more faithful to the church. And so once a month, my mother and I would be on a list of people. We'd go and clean the church, get it ready, get that done. I taught Sunday school, led in worship, all the stuff, youth ministry. So much of that we do that the church pays today, we volunteered for. First of all, the church couldn't afford it. Second of all, growing up, I never knew people got paid for that. I'm a product of the Methodist Church before we became United, and that just where so many people are. The importance of lay people, and also one of the fun things when I served the church is just identifying the gifts that people have and what they would be good at, and often had to talk them into serving in certain places. Sometimes you didn't, but that's for myself, for lay people, is identifying the gifts and say, hey, have you ever thought of doing this or doing that? And it's always so fun to see lay people embracing that and loving it, and then extending themselves in other ways. And even in ministry, we, for the lay missioners, we're thinking this person would be a good pastor as well. Well, you need people in other places, and myself has been a big encourager. People to say, have you ever thought about ministry in this particular way? And that's been pretty cool.
Okay, I have to throw a little maybe rabbit trail question. So
Sure.
if you can say no, let's get back on course. But as I'm just thinking about how you're bringing us into that awareness of early circuit riders, lay empowerment, and then I think about the kind of the social contract in most United Methodist congregations. And there's outliers, right? I'm working with a group of your folks in Nebraska right now, actually. And,
Yeah.
but the way that our ministry set up, and the pages of pastoral job description in the Book of Discipline, that no one human could ever do all of them. It's like the pastor produces the religious goods and services, does all the pastoral stuff. Lay people more serve as consumers, or when we talk about lay empowerment, we're talking about serving on committees or being a liturgist or those kind of things. But I hear you talking about people that were really empowered to share the gospel, to create community, to serve essentially. As priests in a priesthood. And today, like, I think we had a glitch there. Are y'all back?
Yeah, we're back. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, it's internet connection. But anyway, how do we change that where institutionally it's almost frowned upon? Like the success story is the big church with the full-time pastor, and and in some places by necessity we're having to move back to this circuit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think nothing, not intentional to give them a plug, but I think about the work that Karen Lampe's doing with the Caring Congregation, training lay people for big churches, training lay people to help the pastor with the work that he or she simply cannot do on their own, even in big churches. I think about Stevens Ministries, people who get trained to do those things. But some of those for my work, it becomes organic for what lay people get to do there. But that's even in large churches that become such a necessity for folks to do that kind of work. Even think about Resurrection with their large number of staff. The Caring Congregation does some great work there as well because people simply cannot do all that. So it's a piece we need to continue to think about in the church of how we engage lay people. And in the Great Plains, a couple of districts who've done some of this study or classes on that, that's been some of the biggest crowds we've had. And so that tells me people are interested. When we did when Karen came to even Western Kansas, there's a big turnout. And I said, okay, that means people are interested there. And so that's a big piece that we need to continue to think about. It's always not about paid jobs, but it's about how we engage lay people in these specific ministries.
Amen. So many Fresh Expressions or missional communities or basic ecclesial communities, fill in the blank. These kind of contextual, incarnational forms of church, they often emerge out of like a desire to be present where there's pain or injustice or exclusion. So how can the churches work in racial justice and anti-racism and inclusivity? How can that be embodied through kind of these more grassroots, innovative kind of communities that seems harder sometimes to be in the inherited space? But
yeah, that's such a tough place. You really have to be gifted and strong to be able to work in those with those kinds of ministries, especially around social justice for that. And when you run for a bishop, at least in the South Central, they give you a long list of questions that you complete. it ends up being about 20 pages that those who are going to vote for you will read. And one of the questions was, what passage do you resonate with the most? And mine was, of course, Micah, passage from Micah, how we do justice, love kindly, and walk humbly with God, which has been my mantra. I think not intentional. That just who I was shaped to be by a mother who lived that life of people she worked with and served with, and still does. She's 90. My mother will be 92 in the fall, and doesn't get out much. But even in her neighborhood, she still does great things. We have a friend down the road, full-blood Cherokee, whose wife passed several years ago. And so she goes down, helps him with the mail, this or that, because he can't do that. But those kinds of things that she's taught me, the values of how we care for one another. And but what a great place for us to be in ministry with so much going on, especially right now, here in the Great Plains, working with, created this task force on immigration and working with our immigration group out in Nebraska, Omaha, who also works with MCOR, getting to do some amazing work with them, advocacy, helping the church to come along to say, here's the stories of what's happening, and how can we help alleviate this pain, and how can we walk alongside the folk. And so that's just one of my great joys when I get to do that. Often it's just advocacy now just because of this role, but when I get to be involved in that, and especially around Native issues, a lot of just education, advocacy here in the Great Plains and beyond. But what a great place for folks to be in ministry with, and young folks who love that kind of work as well. And it's a joy to see so many doing that kind of work, and knowing that as we continue this work, we'll be in good shape.
Amen. Isaiah, before you jump in there, because I know you're actively doing some of this work, you and Daniel, in local setting and with bread breakers and those kind of things. Would you want to speak into that question yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so Restoration Reston, we're a congregation in Northern Virginia, and we started off doing listening sessions in the community about what are the needs of the community? Where are people seeing a need, a gap, where they feel something missing in their lives? And one of the things that we kept hearing was community and connection. And so Restoration Reston for an entire year began the work of starting something called Bread Breakers, which is building bridges one table at a time. And we're at a table sharing a meal, and we basically say it doesn't matter what background, who you are, just come and be in community, and let's enter into these conversations over a meal. There's something really wonderful that happens over a meal.
Yeah.
And I think Bishop, you mentioned that earlier. And in that space, we've now been, Bread Breakers have been around for at least now a year of preparation, and now a year in launch. And what we're finding is it's so incredible how we have on average anywhere from like 60 to 80 people who come, and about only 15 to 20 folks are Restoration church members, and then the rest are from the community.
Wow.
And yeah, and people are just showing up because there's a sense of deep spiritual connection. And we're talking about people who are not just Christians. We're talking about people of, other faith, other religious background, and those who don't identify as being religious. And people are coming together in this holy space, having these deep conversations and creating friendship and connections that they wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. And it's just this beautiful expression of what church really should look like. But again, it birthed out of what are the needs of the people, and where are they hurting, and what are they missing? Yeah.
Love that. We the Great Plains in the urban areas doing a lot of that work around justice ministries. So they had this network of folk that the Great Plains leads, not leads intentionally, but have always had great leadership. And so we do the same thing. We go and say, they gather folks together, maybe 600 or 700 people, and say, what is it that's keeping you up at night? And then they begin to work on that. So when they have these gatherings, 1,400 people show up, and they bring commissioners or legislators. Say, here's our issue. How are you going to help us? And they always come back with good results. Folks are driven to want to make a change in their community, whether it's on homelessness or jail populations, mental health facilities, and the rest. So just those are things that galvanize people who just may not be real keen on the church, but they are in wanting to do what's right and help others. So that sounds like what you're doing there in Virginia as well. Love that.
So, this is a question that I've actually been really wanting to ask you. So at the Fresh Expressions United Methodist National Gathering, you shared about the 7 generations principle. And we built the coming years theme around your wisdom.
Wow.
And we really look forward to hearing from you again. Could you explain the 7 generations principle to our listeners, and what are its origins, and why is it so important for the church today?
Yeah, thank you. This has been one of my favorite pieces. I preached on the 7 generations, as you know, at the 2024 General Conference. When I got done, Bishop Harvey said, Bishop, you need to write that one, as long as you can. and I had, because you go in the different places I go, people aren't familiar with that, with this concept. And what I have found, although most of it's ingrained today in the Iroquois folk and the Haudenosaunee people, which is made up of about 6 nations upper Northeast, who I think probably started this. But in the meantime, as I listened to videos or other people reference, so many tribes reference the 7 generations. And so began going back to that, the Haudenosaunee people, the Confederacy, is that they think that they use the 7 generations concept. And so what it does is say, when you think about decisions that you're making, whether it's for your church, organization, whatever, you need to think about how those decisions affect the next 7 generations ahead. For that, and one of the, I think it's Oren Lyons, one of the peacekeepers said, think about the 7 generations, how that affects them, but also so that they can enjoy what you have today. So that's a good one for local churches. We're used to some, because economics and other reasons, just try to get by. But thinking about next 7 generations, decisions we make in the life of the church, how that affects ministry, what we do today for that many generations ahead. It's a powerful thing to think about, that concept of what that means there. One of the pieces I found, I'm paraphrasing, should have this memorized, but one said, when you think about this 7 generation, really what that means is we're borrowing from our grandchildren's children. So everything we do today to Mother Earth and to this world, and decisions we make about our families and churches and communities, although we're thinking about right now, think about 7 generations down the road and how that impacts those folks. But just the powerful piece of borrowing Earth from our grandchildren's children. And that's a powerful place to be at. So I love to use it. I use it often as I get to teach and preach, and helping our congregations think ahead for what that means for their ministries. And I'm using the context of the local church, because that's what I work in. So I love using that, and both find, I think, much value in thinking. Really causes us to think about what that means. And even the 6 tribes up in the area, they still use that concept. When they're in tribal council, when they make decisions on behalf of the people, they ask themselves that questions: how will these decisions affect the next 7 generations? It's powerful, really. Stop and think about that.
And Michael, question for you. So why did we, as with FXUM, choose this and the importance of, right, with Fresh Expressions movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bishop Wilson, we were just really blessed by your teaching at the National
you.
Gathering in
Thank
Atlanta.
you.
Yeah, and I think I don't know that we've been super good at thinking in this way in inherited congregational life, and I think we're in a time where the 7-generation principle is not what most of the leadership in this nation are thinking about right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would just put in my little personal 2 cents here. I could be totally wrong about this, and there's lots of different perspectives on it. But when we have policies that like don't want to think about the implications for the planet in the fossil fuels that we use or whatnot, when we have really these self-centered kind of, it's about us in this moment in our thriving now. And I just think of how counter-cultural this thought is actually. And if we look at like last year's election and the leading things that people voted for was like, immigration and personal financial benefit, right? And those are not other oriented things, right? Those are really self-centered. Like I want my neighborhood to not have these, immigrant people in it, and I want to make more money and have, and at some level that's good. All of us want to see our families have food and flourishing in those things, but they're also not. They're the opposite of the 7-generation principle, right? And so the other thing, Bishop Wilson, the interview before you, we had a world-renowned wisdom scholar, Dr. Monica Ardelt, on, and she studied all the different kind of wisdom paradigms in the world, one of them being indigenous wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And she created this concept called 3D wisdom, which has cognitive, self-reflective, and compassion dimensions. So wise people know stuff, right? They cognitively know things, and they have like ethical decision making. They're self-reflective. They have the ability to see themselves in the greater stream of history and community and all of that. I'm sharing this because you embody this for me.
Yeah.
And they're compassionate. They don't just think about their own needs, right? But wise people think about the whole system and the good of others, which is deeply baked into that 7-generation principle.
Yeah.
And we have people saying stuff like compassion or empathy is like the great weakness of human society, which is so anti-Jesus's teaching and anti-scripture. So you helping us think through like, what is the church going to look like, not just for us? How do we kind of call our nation back to this kind of thinking and thinking sustainability of the planet, sustainability of our community, sustainability about the way we do church? I think that's why it's so important in this moment.
Love that. And I think about, this model, as you mentioned, this society now says, look out for yourself, take care of your own family, everything's about you. And that's so contrary to indigenous thought. Our understanding of community is we're all in this together. We take care of one another. What affects one's going to affect the rest. Chief Seattle's beautiful speech that he had so many years ago about how we're all tied together in this single thread. And what we do to the earth, we do to everybody. And so you're right about that. This concept of it's never about number one, it's about everybody. And even for indigenous communities, it's not just about their tribes, it's about all of the world, all of humanity. So
I love that. So now we're going to ask you to like lean into the 7-generation kind of thinking for our listeners and tell us if you could imagine the next decade of the UMC and kind of where we're heading, and the Fresh Expressions movement is part of that, right? But taking Native American indigenous wisdom and kind of what do you see generate down the stream, right? What do you imagine the next decade of the church is going to look like?
Yeah. I earlier this year was at Junaluska. I was the theologian for the week. I love that title. I had a fun time using that title for the rest. But what I shared there was, Michael, 572 tribes in this country, nations and villages. You can imagine that many languages, that many cultures. And people do with indigenous folk as we do with African American folk, Hispanic, Latino, Asian. We assume we're all alike, and we're so different from one another, and especially for indigenous people. I said, but as I traveled across Oklahoma and across the country and in indigenous places around this world, three things I find always. I don't have to look for it. That's understanding of community, which I talked about already, of how we are called to care for all there. The other piece is on relationship. Relationship is so important to indigenous peoples. There, that piece of just wanting to connect with people, and the understanding it's not just about this human relationship, but all of God's creation, the animals, the birds, the winged ones, the swimmers, all these folk that we're connected with and that we don't talk about today, and that becomes so valuable, especially the relationship piece. And then the last one is the hospitality that you find everywhere among indigenous communities. Got us in trouble from day one when Columbus first came, and Dr. Tom Whitewood Fassett, who I really first learned much of the 7 generations from the Haudenosaunee people, because he's Seneca. He wrote about Columbus coming, and he writes back to his sponsors and says, these people are so nice and so good that they would give the hearts away if I asked them. Well, they did. He killed them. Those he didn't kill, he sent off as slaves back to his countries there. And you think about the Thanksgiving story, this hospitality, this hunky-dory story we share every Thanksgiving. And if people really knew the whole story, many would, but many would not be celebrating Thanksgiving the way that they understand that. And so those three things that I think the church could thrive on, this community, everyone's included, we're all connected. There, this relationship piece that's so valuable that we should be understanding, practicing, living out. And the third piece is hospitality, and how we treat people in the life of the church, and how we accept people, include people, and what we get to do. And I get to use those three often. I probably wore it out the first year and a half when I came to the Great Plains, but those are so ingrained in me and in the life of the people I get to serve. And it's just should be an easy concept for us to grasp, but they're often not. And if the church could do those things well, man, we'd be living well into the future, along with us thinking about what it means for us to care for the future.
So if we anchor ourselves in those values and seek to embody them, then you see great things on the horizon.
Yeah.
Couple of things you said that I love the diversity of indigenous thought and theology among the different tribes. And I wish that, there's groups of Christians and they talk about the Orthodox Christian faith and the one historic orthodoxy, and they use it in a kind of a weaponized way, right? And when I look back over the history of Christianity, there's always been streams of Christianities, right? Even in the Gospels, even like in the very beginning, you have like Tertullian and a kind of theology coming out of his thinking. And then you had, Irenaeus and more of a liberative kind of liberation focused theology. And then you had, the allegorical theology coming out of Athens. And then you have the oldest continuously existent church in the world, right? One of them, which is in Ethiopia and Africa, Black church for Black. And then we take all that beauty, all that diversity, and we try to put it in these really confining creeds, and that this is the one way to think about this. You have disagreement or different thoughts, diversity opinions around even the way that Jesus is God, all across history. And I think we could learn from the indigenous way of like embracing all of those different perspectives and that all of them have like a little portion that point to the divine and point to God.
Yeah.
And there's clearly those things that follow Jesus, right, that we hold to, but sometimes we do that in an exclusive way. So I was trying to sift through all that to say, denominationally, if we don't change some of the ways that we kind of structure things and how we organize and even our metrics, like those things that you just named, our current metrics don't necessarily capture that or even see that as vitality.
Yeah.
Because it's this really collapsed thing of like butts and bucks, how many people signed up to be members, and those things. And you're talking about a whole different kind of vitality, that the future of our denomination is really dependent on that.
Yeah. And Michael, I think often about young people who are not well informed at all about Christianity. I taught biblical literature for years, and when I think my last year, maybe in 16, 17, and I saw that shift, and I had one young student that came and said, David, the professor said, my family was not church. I know nothing about this Bible. So when you teach it, you got to go back to square one. Boy, that was hard. It was hard to go back to Genesis stories, thinking everyone knows these Genesis stories. Everyone knows these other stories, and they don't. And that's been 6 or 7 years. So I can imagine what it's like to teach now. And that was a required course, but now what it would be like to teach for a generation that knows so little. But I can imagine all these different faiths and denominations teaching different things about how you live and eternity, and that has to be overwhelming for anyone who doesn't know anything. I'm thinking, man, sometimes you can see why folks would give up, thinking, where do I start? And but I also find it's through those conversations you have, relationships you create, they get people to start to wondering about why do you do what you do? And again, that's where the stories and this interaction relationship comes into being with people, to help them understand why we do what we do, and why we are Christian, why we serve God, why we care for others, take care of the world. So yeah, appreciate that.
So, what word of hope, Bishop, would you offer to the church, and where the church will be in the future? Like right now, currently, like what kind of word of hope would you offer to the church about where the church will be in the future? Because I know you described, the three things about where the church needs to be and what we can look like and what we can be. But what word of hope, if you were speaking to them right now, like what word of hope would you say to them?
Yeah, the first of all is understanding of the presence of Christ in our lives, and that inclusive love that's for all people, and for us to continue to share that message, and not just share it, but to live it out. That shows people who are not connected that we're for real about what we talk about. We've lived it, we've experienced it, and we know it's true. And just to continue to find ways to share that message. And the hope I see in so many conferences and places that are trying new things. And Michael, you're right. Me as a bishop, when we look at metrics, that's a challenge for some. And yet we see, when superintendents talk about ministries that's happening, it's not stuff we can measure. Small church of 5 to 10 people, the outreach that they do in the community and the rest. We pay attention to those things. We get those. But often it is the metrics that keep us back, especially when our own entities ask us to turn in reports and this and that. But we often struggle with the question: how do we measure vitality? What does that mean? Some of you two maybe too young. Years ago, when the church, every 4 years we do some kind of study, and they did a study on how to measure or how to work on vitality. Well, that lasted 4 years, and we never saw nothing from it again for that. And there was even reports we had to give about that. So you're right about that when we think about that. But my hope is just looking at thinking about the conferences and places and churches that are trying to do new things, willing to take a risk, And then we've got to find ways to get others on board or help us to see the reality of what's happening. And when we visit with churches that don't want to do anything, that's our opportunity, at least in my cabinet, for a superintendent to say, what do you want to be in 5 years? Or where will you be if you continue at this stead? Now, there are some, they don't care. I mean, it's unfortunate for some churches, especially those that are struggling, it's about themselves. It's this inner peace of we're going to take care of ourselves and at least till we die off, and then we'll have a place to be buried and so forth. But there's hope and so many others, and especially with Fresh Expressions, the work that you're doing, helping the church understand, leaders like myself, the importance of these ministries, and all based upon what we're not doing already in the life of the church. So I see that hope. See it often throughout the Great Plains, other places when I travel, see what's happening. And I was just trying to finish a study someone just gave me about church vitality in England and the Wales, and where that is increasing. And so the hope they have is saying young people are coming back, young men are coming back, which is not always the case for the United Methodist Church. We see pockets where that's happening. And I got to finish reading the article just to see what they're doing and what we could learn from them as well. I hope that's helpful.
So helpful, so helpful. Everybody, to all our listeners, this was just a little spoiler of what you'll be able to experience in Fresh Expressions UM 2026 National Gathering. The whole theme is built around Bishop Wilson's wisdom. And so we hope that you'll come. We're really committed. That's on February 26th to 28th in Ocala, Florida. And we made it free for everybody out there so that we don't want a barrier for lay people to come. So you get there and get your travel covered. And one of our commitments is to be an inclusive space. So we try to hear from voices and stories that people usually don't have a chance to share those stories. Mm-hmm. So Bishop, where can people find you? How can they follow you online? What are you working on recently that people might be interested in?
Thank you, Michael. Most of my work, and thankful to my communications department, who does a great job of making me look decent. Most of my travels and work is through Facebook, and the last month I spent mentioned the week at Junaluska as Theologian of the Week, talking about those three values, and then finishing at Chautauqua, looking at did 4 or 5 things, talking about the theme was created in beloved people, created in the image of God, and helping folk understand who we are as beloved people. And the contributions we made leaned a lot on wisdom from the past. So those are the places where I'm up and around or preaching, doing this or that. That's where you can find me. And Michael, I do have to say, when I was at the event last fall with Fresh Expressions, well, I was just got to be there for a day, but the people I got to hear and the work they were doing, and I would just thought, man, these young folks, which mostly young folk, however, anyone younger than myself, great work they're doing, and I was just fascinated and excited. And I know that the Lincoln area, our district there, Lincoln, Nebraska, doing a lot of great work around Fresh Expressions, and hoping that they'll be at this event. But just fun to see what they're doing. And other ways, was visiting with the superintendent about a pastor who has an online church ministry, and I said that would be a great Fresh Expressions for us. And so again, thinking about now for myself, as I became more acquainted, to see how we can use that in the Great Plains, and just excited for the work that you folk do. And man, it's a blessing and inspiring for many of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop. This has been just so amazing.
Thank you.
And I know,
thank you.
Yeah, and I think that people listening are really going to take this in. So thank you for your wisdom, your story, and God is going to continue to do God things through you and your ministry. And we look forward to continue to working with you.
Thank you, and me as well. Thank you both. Appreciate it. All right.
All right, friends, thank you
Right.
so much for joining us for this episode of New People, New Ways. And friends, if you've enjoyed our conversation with Bishop Wilson, please share it with a friend, get the word out. And to connect with us or learn more about Fresh Expressions, please check out freshexpressionsfl.org or Fresh Expressions UM on the Discipleship Ministries website. Hope to see you next time on New People, New Ways.
Thank you.